Who is wise and understanding among you? Would you like to put your hand up? I wonder if it is James's joke as he asks the question. Was it rhetorical? Who is wise and understanding among you? Who has that first-class degree, or is professor of so-and-so, or who is the judge who gives those decisions and has that power? He was writing to an ordinary bunch of Christians, many who would have had very little education at all. Some would have a real knowledge of the scriptures and a real knowledge of the ways of the world. There were businessmen, there were rich people among those that James was speaking to. But he asks that question, and he waits, in a sense, for us to stand up or to put our heads down. Because, of course, those who stand up and say, well, yeah, I'm wise, I know it all, I've arrived, are those that are foolish in God's sight. It reminds me of an episode of Dad's Army. I've always found that very instructive, that sitcom of the past, where Captain Mannering talks to Sergeant Wilson. One of Sergeant Wilson's pet phrases is that wise, sir? Is that wise? But at this point, Mannering is talking about his feelings about the platoon that he leads. You know, Wilson, over the years, I've come to know the members of the platoon. I've grown quite fond of them. But I can't help feeling sometimes that I'm in charge of a bunch of idiots. Well, hopefully we're not a bunch of idiots, but we're part of a world that seems foolish, that seems stupid and idiotic at times in its relationships, in its relationship to the creation and the planet, in the corruption and the untruth that we see around us. And at times we are caught up in that idiotic, foolish way of the world. The corrupted wisdom of the world, of playing the crowd, ignoring the warning signals, twisting the truth, seeking personal gain at the expense of the common good, avoiding responsibility, shifting the blame. What of us? Who among us is wise and understanding? We know that the moment we stand up and say, well, we're wise, then we are shown to be foolish. There was a joke about a Cambridge theologian that his mind had gone to his head. And once his mind had gone to his head, he had, in a sense, lost his way. He had put himself before the God who is all-wise and all-loving. The great poet T.S. Eliot once said that the only wisdom we can hope to acquire is the wisdom of humility, knowing just how much we don't know, knowing just how much we need the help and the guidance of God's Spirit. James wants us to have that kind of wisdom. And in this, he follows that long tradition of the wisdom literature of the Bible, those great words of Proverbs, that the one who is wise in their own estimate is foolish before God. Wisdom is not about knowledge or expertise or qualifications. Wisdom is about seeing the world right, having the right perspective, seeing it as God sees reality. Charles Spurgeon, that great 19th century preacher, said, "Wisdom is the right use of knowledge. To know is not to be wise. There is no fool so great a fool as the knowing fool. But to know how to use knowledge is to have wisdom." To know how to use knowledge is to have wisdom. The wisdom that James is sharing with us is not an abstract, knowledge-based wisdom. It's not just theory. It involves action. He tells his readers to show the wisdom by the way they live, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. And then he talks about the destructive wisdom of the world, that of envy and selfish ambition, the denial of truth, and the disorder and evil that are bred by such attitudes. It's fascinating that James links true wisdom with peacemaking, and he links demonic worldly wisdom with conflict and violence. And we see enough of that violence in our world today. We've seen the agonies of Afghanistan in this last 20 years. Operation Enduring Freedom began on the October 2001, following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The final withdrawal of US troops has seen the Taliban return in all their force. Whatever their words, we know that that will bring repression and more violence. Such agonies, such foolishness. Many of us thought 20 years ago that the invasion and the war on terror was folly. But we pray that old follies will not generate new ones. Maybe it is better that the Taliban has come back quickly without a protracted, deadly conflict over years and years, because ultimately their time will come, their fall will come, and some kind of new Afghanistan will be born. But in the meantime, we watch with distress, and we pray that actions will be taken to respond to those great needs that are developing day by day. 360 years ago, this country went through a deadly conflict. And ultimately, Oliver Cromwell died and his son became Lord Protector, Richard Cromwell. He was seen as a rather weak character. He was nicknamed Tumbledown Dick. But he did have the wisdom to stand back and to let Parliament recall the king. "I will not have a drop of blood spilt for the preservation of my greatness," he said. And that was from a real position of faith that he said those words. "I will not have a drop of blood spilt for the preservation of my greatness." We pray that wisdom for those who have power in our world today. The wisdom to know when to act and when to stand to one side. Who is wise and understanding among you? Can we be wise? Not with the world's wisdom that leads to dispute and conflict and violence, but with the wisdom that comes from above. The wisdom that is pure, peaceable, gentle, humble, full of mercy and good fruits. I think if you saw that in our Parliament, if you saw that in the United Nations, if you saw that in the world around us, wisdom that is pure, peaceable, gentle, humble, full of mercy and good fruits. These are the gifts from God, who is all wise and all kind. And so James ends by challenging us to seek God's way. To seek God's way and not our own way. Submit yourselves then to this loving, wise, gracious God. Resist evil. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to the loving, wise, gracious God. And this loving, wise, gracious God will draw near to you. May the God who is near draw us to himself.